welcome to the stream. How are you all keeping? So, we've got St. Paddy's Day coming up, or St. Patrick's Day, and I said I'd stick to the theme, and I didn't want to do a leprechaun, because it's feels a bit obvious, and the fact that I'm Irish, I felt like I should probably come up with something better than a leprechaun. So I was trying to think of like stuff that I learned about, like folklore and stuff that I learned about in school. So one that stuck out was there's an old Irish folklore about a man called Cuchulainn. So I thought I'd do him, and I guess the best thing you could compare Cuchulainn to is like something between the Hulk and Hercules, I suppose. So I said I'd do him. So I decided as well I wasn't gonna do I was just gonna free flow it in 3D today, just to change it up. If you don't mind, let me see there. Pull this over here so I can see what you are saying. Hey, Airdom, finally, yeah, got there eventually. Yeah, I wasn't streaming there for a little bit. But I'm back. Oh, Deadpool is in. That's nice. How Deadpool? Adrian didn't change just sculpt the leprechaun. I think so. He may have. That's what I mean. Like St. Patrick's Day, everyone thinks of a leprechaun, which I mean, because that's what's most associated with it. And I was considering doing a leprechaun because not everyone knows. Well, most people don't know Irish folklore outside of Ireland. So I was kind of thinking, well, like I want something to be recognisable to people and not just. But I thought, considering I'm Irish, I better not just default to a leprechaun. So yeah, I decided to go with something more close to home. So I went with Cuchulainn. So the idea of Cuchulainn is, like I said, kind of like, well, he was described as like a pretty small man. Or in the story I know, I think he was a boy. So the idea basically was his father was supposedly an Irish god called Lug, who was like the god of like a warrior god, and I think he was supposed to be like a kind of blacksmith, and he was associated with like, skill and these kind of things, and that's supposed to be Cuchulainn's father. So he was like a demigod, similar to Hercules. And the story that I remember of Cuchulainn was basically that he was playing the Irish game hurling, which if you don't know is worth looking up. It's quite cool. It's the fastest sport in the world, fastest field sport in the world. And he was playing hurling, and he played so well that he impressed the king, who was going to a banquet, and he was invited. The king invited Cuchulainn to this banquet, but the king didn't tell anyone that he would be arriving, and when he did, they thought it was a stranger approaching, and they set a hound on him, and this hound was the Hound of Cullen, and it was a monstrous thing. And basically because he had played hurling, he was holding what's called a sliotar, which is the ball that you play with in hurling, and a hurl, which is a stick. And when the hound ran at him, he tossed the ball and hit the ball at the hound and rammed the slither down the hound's throat, instantly killing it. And he went from his original name, like his birth name, was Satanta, but from that day on he became Kilcullen. And that's basically, that's what I remember from school, like that particular story. But there's a bunch of other ones. The reason I compare him to the Hulk actually is because I think the idea is that he grew up to become like a great warrior, of course, and I guess actually maybe more like Achilles than Hercules. And when he became enraged, like the Hulk, he like turned into this big monster that looked nothing like him as well, because he was supposedly like all the husbands in the land tried to find him a wife, because they were all afraid that if he didn't find a wife, he'd steal one of theirs, because he was so attractive. So, but when he enraged, he turned into this big, ugly, horrible monster. And I think like stuff like you could see is he essentially turned inside out and grew huge. Like one of his eyes popped out and all this type of stuff. I mean, there's all different renditions of what he turned into, but that's essentially the idea, I think, for the most part. But so I thought it'd be a cool one. I was thinking it could be good to do, like, I want to do the Kilcullen that I'm more familiar with, which is when he's young and he's killed the hound. I guess he's like a teenager. And then who knows, maybe if I enjoy it, maybe I'll do some sort of version of him in his kind of beast mode. And I was thinking it could be nice to have him, like a sculpt of him rendered, and then the beast version of him like standing behind them. Could look kind of cool, could be a nice piece of work. So that's the plan. I need something to listen to here while I'm doing this. There we go. So that's the plan. But I'm just going to free flow here, which I don't usually do. I usually start with some 2D. But I thought I always show you that, so just to mix it up. I'll just free flow it. I think it's better generally for me. It's better to be going from 2D. I usually do some 2D first, and it tends to go faster, obviously, but also just there's decisions that you make in 2D that you wouldn't necessarily make when you're working in 3D, because your process kind of has a massive effect on how your work turns out, which I've talked about before. Even like working this way, having separate subtools and stuff, changes will have an effect on your final piece compared to if you just took a sphere, used Dynamesh, or in fact if you start with a base mesh. That's why I never start with a base mesh, unless I'll do it for like production work sometimes, because that's generally the fastest way, because obviously your topology and stuff is there, and it's just clean up after, rather than doing a full sculpt from scratch and then like wrapping the topology to it or whatever. You can just I'll make him kind of thin but muscular, something that'd lure you into a sense of false security, like he doesn't look that strong, but then he hits you and he sends you through the clouds, is the idea. Aloha, hairy mandibles, nice. Oh, hey Shane, how's it going, brother? How's she cutting? Yeah, and I've wanted to do like an Irish sculpt for ages. Actually, I'm gonna switch. Let's see a bit better. I've wanted to do an Irish sculpt for a good long time, and I had thought about doing Cuchulainn before. There's a bunch of other ones, like another kind of strange one I was thinking of that would be kind of maybe funnier was there's one about the salmon and knowledge. It's literally like a salmon that knows everything, kind of. It's weird, but I was thinking of doing the salmon and knowledge, but doing them like smoking a pipe, sitting on like a big, brown leather chair next to like a little table and a glass of whiskey or something, reading a book, looking clever. Could do it, yeah. It's nice to have little, even silly ideas like that, just in the barrel there if you ever want to find something new to sculpt. So there's that, and then there's like the Children of Lear's another one, where the king's children were turned to swans. There's loads of different fun ones. Greetings from Finland. Welcome, Cap Awesome 3D. Mr. R, is there anything to help me? Mr. R, is there anything to help me? I have no idea where the context is in that. Oh, from Costa Rica, nice. Check Pixologic classroom. Oh, okay. Oh, someone asked. I'm trying to catch up now with the chat. Hey Alex, yeah. I still need to change my name to Sculpting Easy Peasy with Paul Deasy. If whoever came up with that, I remember, what was it? You were like, was it like a Lord of the Rings name they had as their username? Can't remember now. If you're in there, say something. Say hi. Because that was a stroke of genius. I still need to do it. Yeah, so just getting like the general head shape, kind of, which this could change drastically now because I'm essentially concepting. Well, I am concepting, I guess, on the fly. Yeah, so I find concepting in 3D, not that like there's lots of people do it and very effectively. I find, and I don't know, is it different, like because my style is more, I suppose, more applicable to animation generally speaking. Not always, like there's obviously stylized games characters, of course, but in terms of if comparing the industries, there's a lot more stylized characters in animation. And I find like when I do something in 2D first, because I can just draw a line, I'll do much more. I'll be a bit more loose and a bit more wild with it. Where when I concept in 3D, maybe just because it's like by nature it's a slower process, so I tend to be a bit more stiff, if that makes sense. Like anyone there's like does any 2D at all, stiff as in the flow of lines and so on. They don't have a lot of, like, they're not as dynamic. Yeah, I'd say that's the best way to describe it. Is the shapes tend to not be as dynamic when I go straight into 3D without doing any 2D. But I still do it from time to time just for fun. Like I'll just start sculpting something. But I generally find I don't get as successful a design out of it. But the thing is as well, another way of going about it is you could always start in 3D and get a base that you're kind of happy with, and then do your own kind of paint over. That's another thing you can do. Like if you're not as inclined to drawing, that can help, because you can kind of see where that's not really looking as, that shape isn't quite as interesting as I'd like it to be, and you can just kind of play with it, like literally just draw over it, which I find also really helpful. Even if I start in 2D, I'll do that sometimes. Like while I'm working on it, I'll just do a screen grab, throw it into Photoshop and start drawing over it and just see can I get anything else out of it. IR Sculpts is in. How's it going, man? Monster Girl. Hey, Monster Girl. Jeffrey Espinal, my favorite artist, dude. Thanks so much, man. That means a lot. It's cool to hear. Thanks for joining. Yeah. So yeah, that's something that's I think important to be aware of. That your process in a large way will dictate the outcome visually of your work, even down to like if you start with 2D or start with 3D, like that's gonna have an effect. And and that's not to say like for better or for worse. There's no one, like I don't claim to have the best way or anything. It's whatever you're comfortable and you enjoy doing. Cheers, Kostia. So yeah, it is fun to do this though, because just kind of taking it easy and just making random decisions as I go, not really getting too caught up, just enjoying the process of it, which is also important. Let me see, this hasn't got, oh it does, I'll delete that for now. Nope. I wonder, I don't know yet how stylized I want to go. I might just let that, if I bring that out. What's going to be, I guess, difficult is designing him in such a way that he feels, because I want to stick to the lore, you know what I mean, that he's this like handsome guy, but also I want him to look, like you don't want to mess with him. A little bit. I don't want to make him like a really warrior-esque, but because I like the idea of the contrast. That's why I don't want to do that. I don't want to do it because I like the idea of the contrast between this relatively harmless looking guy, not completely harmless, but just not really threatening, looking, versus this like beast that he turns into. You know what I mean? I like the idea of like, I don't know, I'm thinking of like did you ever see the Achilles movie? What was that called? It wasn't called Achilles. The one with Brad Pitt. Like there's a scene where they're about to, like two armies are about to fight, and then they decide like if they just pit their two best warriors against each other, and they send out this like monstrous man. Troy, that's the one. Yeah, of course, Troy. They send out this big monstrous man, this huge big guy, and then Achilles walks out, and he's like a third of this guy's size, and he just takes him out in one blow. Like I like that idea. So it kind of makes sense that this guy, like he has a similar kind of story, so I want to work with that. Which I'd say is it's a pretty, like, that's an important part of, like, when you're working on a character, work to the narrative. And always be trying to think of the narrative. It's easy to forget sometimes, you know, you just do something for the sake of it, because it looks cool, which you can get away with to a point. But really, you should always be thinking of the narrative that the character's in order to serve the point. Because otherwise, you know, you're in danger of doing, like, making something generic and all the most because your design shouldn't just look good, it should be interesting, and to make it interesting you need to have a narrative to work off of. You know, you can't just make something interesting out of nothing, like a blank page, nothing, no backstory or whatever. Yeah, it's at least, I mean, it can be interesting for some reasons, but, you know, if you're going with a funky style or something, that can be interesting, but if you're gonna do something with a character or anything, even a set, have some narrative. It'll only help. You know what I mean? If you're gonna do something, you know, it's like if you're gonna make a bet, you want to bet on with your best chances, put your best foot forward. So try not to skip these things. Some decent size eyeballs. I've said that before, it's important. Don't make the eyeballs too small. End up with a bug eye. Now I'm just checking the distance. Now see, okay, so here I want to make the eyeballs bigger. Why? Because I'm just looking here, right? So say I have eyelids, but there's a lot of curvature there. So if I increase the size of the eyeball, pull it in. Oh, I need to search out. You see now, because it's bigger, I have less curvature along the surface that will be visible under the eyelids. There's less there. So, and that's important, not just for doing sculpts, but when in production, that's really important. Because your character is blinking and squinting and all that kind of stuff. So something to keep in mind, keep an eye out for it, because I've seen it so many times in production where a character's eyes are, you know, they're like bug-eyed. And as well, in terms of that, I think I've mentioned this before, but I'll say it again because it is important, is have a plane at the side of the face. Don't have the side plane of your face going all the way to the eye. There's a turn here, and that's because your eye socket is wrapped around your eyeball. There's a turn here before it gets to the eye, and don't make that too thin. Your character is going to look really flimsy, or just give some space here before you start to turn and go to the side of your head. Sometimes in some characters I'll often have like loads of space here just to give like this really thick feeling to the head, really chunky feeling to the head. What brush are you using to pinch the corner of the forms? Just literally the pinch brush. So BPI pinch brush. What was it? The corner. What did you say? The corner of. Oh, the corner of the forms. Okay. Yeah. The pinch brush. Sometimes you can use like a large Damien standard just to pull out an edge. But you want to use it large because obviously if you use a small Damien standard, you're going to just get a line like that, where if you use a big one, so if like the cheeks there, use a Damien standard. If you use a big one, you're getting a broad amount of it, so you get a big edge that, you know, sits with the form properly, like the cheek there, rather than, because obviously what I don't want is like just this kind of line sticking out, you know what I mean? I want the whole form. You can see there. So keep your brush size is important there. Right. I need to pull that in. I can probably afford to pull in that a touch, a smidgen. Again, this is another reason why it can be good to work in pieces. Like if I decide I don't like the eye position, or maybe later on I decide the eyes are too big or too small or too forward or too back, I can, if it's all one piece and I've got eyelids and everything in there, I'm not going to be able to, I'm gonna have to break things, push, stretch, destroy things, and if I have it in separate pieces, I can control the eyelid, I can take the eyeball in isolation. So it's a lot handier. See someone asking for the art station there. Oh, fair play, Ian's got it. You're an L gent. Thank you very much. Thank you, Nicola Maxwell, for your support. Says check. Yeah. Does Paul do only stylized things? I would say I always, my work is always stylized to a point, but you know, I go from like really kind of almost like 90s cartoon style to more like comic book, I would say, kind of style. That's, you know, it's much more like proportionally, it's much more realistic, and but I never go full realism because you can't play with the forms as much, so I don't enjoy it really, personally. Like nothing against realism, obviously, just do you know what, actually, let's get rid of you and do something fun here. I'll just take this mesh extrude. No. This is one of the new brushes in the latest update. If any of you guys aren't aware, as you can see, mesh extrude here, and then your mask will actually draw out a mesh. So we're just going to use that to really quickly get in some planes that we can play with and make the ear. The other thing is, and how I'd usually work as well, if I need to do something like this, I'll usually work with a plane first, get that into position, then extrude it so I can control the thickness, rather than sculpting into this and the thickness. I have to like fight to get the thickness consistent. Again, when you're working in realism, you know, there's a bit more wiggle room. Where when you're working with stylized, you know, you want to be really conscious of your lines and flow more, because they're front and center. Your forms and flow of lines and so on are much more front and center in stylized work than they are in realism, because obviously, you know, realism, you can kind of, the details are more, well, no, it's not that the details, but you can, a real human doesn't have like loads of flowing edges and so on, you know, so they're not, it's not as front and center as when you do stylized, so you do have to pay more attention to it, because that's kind of the point of why of this of doing stylized. So it just makes sense to make sure you pay close attention to those things. I don't know what kind of ear I want to do. I'd like to get some, like in Hercules, you know, the way they, in Disney's Hercules, they like used the aesthetic of like Greek mythology, like the spirals and stuff, and actually Irish mythology has the spirals and stuff as well, but they use that in the actual design and the characters, which is really cool. And it might be nice to actually do some of that here. Keep it like that for the moment. He's like Shane Olsen. Yeah, like Shane Olsen. I mean, I wouldn't be bundling together every artist that does stylized, but yeah. I mean, yeah, we both do stylized, so I guess, yeah. I mean, it's a pretty good artist to get compared to. I've no complaints with that. Shane's the man. Starting using ZBrush, and you move and sculpt at about 1000 times the speed I do. Well, I've been doing this for a number of years, so that's kind of natural, you know. But you at some point you will move a lot faster. You know, it becomes, you know, I guess like riding a bike or anything like that. Like after a while, like I don't have to think about what buttons I'm pressing or anything. I have keyboard shortcuts and stuff that I'm very much used to. So I can just make movements quicker, I guess. Like even there, I know some people use S, change the brush size. Some people use space. I use space, but I know when I use space, like I'll be almost dragging already as I'm hitting space, like. So I change the brush size and blink and you'll miss the actual menu pop up. Like stuff like that becomes very like muscle memory. So that's all. That's the only difference. I wouldn't worry if you're starting. Don't worry about being fast either. Not to, I know you're not saying you are worried about being fast, but you know, it's just something a lot of people do worry about that. This like speed sculpting, speed painting kind of trendy thing that looks really cool when you see videos and stuff, and then people try to do that, and what they're doing is they're not paying enough attention to the fundamentals. Then they're trying to rush, and it won't do you any good. It's similar to, you know, if you were playing a game. You don't do a speed run when you don't know how to play the game yet. You have to play it a bunch of times until you have everything down, and then you can start doing speed runs. So yeah, don't worry about speed. It'll come. It'll just come naturally. You don't even have to think about it. Eventually, if you're only starting ZBrush, like if you know, you'll get better, you'll get faster, and do you know what? I might even just. I quite like how the chin shape came out. I don't know. Don't know what to do with the mouth yet. What was I saying? Speed, something about speed. Don't worry about speed. Yeah, it'll when you're working or whatever, and you want to maybe not cut corners, but just take the corners quicker. You know, you'll know that's on. Then you know you'll find ways in the software you're using. Like ZBrush is, I love that everything in ZBrush is so customizable. You can set shortcut keys like really quick, and you can place whatever you want wherever you want. You can take out everything, you can add whatever in any place. So ZBrush is great for, like, you know, after you get used to things, you'll be like, oh yeah, I use that all the time, I'm going to put that in my UI down here, you know, Dynamesh or close holes or double whatever. I use that all the time, so I'll use that there. And then say like I use ZRemesh all the time, so I'll be like, right, I'm going to make that one a shortcut key, and before you know it, and you'll just add one shortcut key at a time, and very very quickly you'll have like 8-9 plus shortcut keys that you use on a regular basis, that, you know, like that when you're used to it, someone who's just starting will be looking at it going, how did he just make that do that? And it's usually like just a shortcut key or something like that you know, that person isn't necessarily using. So let's do this. What shape eye do I want to go with? I go like a squarish eye maybe. What software you can advise for texturing except Substance Painter? Well, I don't want to give advice on texturing software because I'm not a texture artist. Like, I texture, but I texture in Substance. And I texture in Substance because, as far as I can tell, it's best for my needs anyway. So, I don't know. I feel like I could hazard an answer, but I don't know. Wouldn't be responsible. I actually do a good chunk of my texturing in ZBrush, Polypaint. Then I add to it in Substance. We can go with that and we'll just edit it later. So I'm using the Topology Brush here. There we go. Let's bring it down to 0, tap, I get a plane. Split that off. Now I can extrude this. But for now I don't want to extrude it, I want to keep it as a plane because I can control it. You know, I only have a few points. I can crease it. Oh, it was creased. There you go. really quickly make it. So it's stuff like that, you know, that you're like, there's loads of ways. Like I used to use a mask across the eye to pull the eyelid. Like when I started, I just sculpted the eyelid out of the head. So, you know, your process changes. Yeah, I think so. In the end, I want this guy to be standing with a slit, with the slitter in one hand that I mentioned earlier, the ball from hurling, and the hurl in his other. And I want him to have like a bit of a cocky look about him. I think will suit the kind of situation he's in, because I kind of imagine like he's just killed the hound. You know, he's standing there as if like action hero with an explosion behind him type situation, just looking cool, just feeling himself. Again, I want to keep it separate, and get the pose of his face, get his expression in, while things are separate. So I have plenty of wiggle room to play around. Yeah, see, if I didn't have when I don't have this down to 0, I tap, I get thickness. So just bring it down to 0. Bring the brush size down to 0. And the reason I'm doing it with that tool is not just because I want the plane, but also because I can control the actual topology itself. So I don't have to, like I used to get the, I used to use mask and extract, but that meant I had to extract, then isolate the front poly group, then Z remesh as low as possible, and then sometimes even go in with the with the Z modeler tool and cut out parts, cut out edges, where this way I can just draw in exactly what edges I want from the get-go. So that's why I found this way to be quicker. And like that kind of stuff is like, you'll find for any of you guys that are like just starting in ZBrush, like obviously it's always great to watch like streams like this and YouTube videos and tutorials. Like absolutely, I did plenty of that, but after a while you know what the tools do and you know what you need, and after a while you'll be able to just, you know, based on the knowledge of what's there and what certain things do, just make your own quick ways to do things. And that can be great because it's more to point on what you need rather than following someone else's way, you know. So you might do it this way with the eyelids, and then at another stage, as you get more and more used to using ZBrush, you might find another tool or whatever that you're like, oh, this actually works even better for the way that I sculpt or my style. Or sorry, I'm just trying to catch up on some, see if I'm missing any questions. All right, okay. So this is a good question. The Babu one. Hey Paul, if you were making a character for production, I was actually I might do a stream and show some topology stuff at some stage. I might start with a base mesh and show you where the topology is sitting and why. So if you were making a character for production and he often is seen with a huge Joker-like smile, would you model him in a neutral expression or with a smile? Because that's how you see him most often. So this would be this is something that I've seen before come up. So for example, I okay, so to answer the smile question, no, you don't want to model him in a smile. Your face for doing a character model for production, it should be neutral. It should never have an expression. There's no reason, because it's just going to make it more awkward. That has to be rigged. You know, so you've got topology, you've got loops coming from the corners of the mouth and going sometimes around the back, sometimes up and around the forehead. And now in order to get him into that smile, you've pulled up the corners of the mouth, right? And in fact, what you've done is effectively, so you would usually get that with blend shapes. So blend shapes are what you use to deform the face for different expressions. So, and you don't do full expressions, you do what's called macro expressions, which are parts of expressions that later the animator can combine to make full expressions. So for example, that smile would be the mouth corners up in combination with the mouth corners out. So you would make two blend shapes there. So to be a bit more clear, a blend shape is literally just, if you have a head and you want it to smile, you duplicate the head, you pull the topology, the mesh, into a smile, and then you can click on both, hit a button that applies one mesh to the other, and then you can dial in the shape of one and translate into the other. So when you do a neutral model, that means you can now create all the blend shapes you need to send them out in up, down, in, out. So you want to go your mouth narrow, mouth wide, mouth up, mouth corners down, jaw open, all those things. And if you bake in a smile, you're going to make life a lot harder for yourself when you've got to do the blend shapes. Or if it's all rigging based, you're still going to make it harder on the rigger. Or even if it's a combination of rigging and blend shapes. So you always want to go with the neutral, always. Now, if the character is often in a specific pose, animation, I think how you can do it is you can save like a pose. There's Nicola Maxwell. I keep trying to get her to stream. She's an animator. She'd be great for answering this question. She might be able to help. I think she might be still there. I don't know, but you can save like an animation library that you can apply to your character that will, everything from walk cycles to, and so I assume also, facial expressions. So like if you have a character that is always has this big grin by default, you don't want to, every time you open a scene, you don't want to have to put it back into that shape. You can save that shape and just turn it on essentially, and then work from there. But the underlying meshes and tools and rig and everything is all done on a neutral, and that's really important. And a lot of people take for granted what neutral is. Like, you need to be, when you're doing that, you need to pay attention that your topology is in the right place and your face is truly neutral. So let's do some eyebrows here and I'll give you an example. Give me this topology brush again. That's a bit much. that stuff, I mean, when you're, if you're just sculpting, great, but if you're going to work in the industry, you have to be able to do these things. And obviously, if you're just starting, and if you're just starting in the industry and you're a junior, you're not necessarily, I mean, it depends. Depends on where you're a junior. If you're a junior in a huge studio, then you're expected to know at least a decent amount of this kind of stuff in some cases. A lot of studios, like when I started, I didn't know anything about making character blend shapes. When I started as a junior, but now obviously, so I'm currently a lead, and so I need to not only know blend shapes, but I need to know it enough that I can I can teach someone how to do them too. So it depends, but if you're just starting out, then of course you're not expected to know. You're expected to, sometimes maybe you didn't get the face quite neutral and stuff, and that's where your lead comes in and says, look, this is how you do such and such a thing. So, right, so neutral in terms of eyebrows, I would expect this. See that? Even like the eyebrow can curl down a little bit, but the eyebrow should be. So what I do is I actually have a mirror, literally just a makeup mirror. I don't know where I got it, probably online or I don't know. And so I'll look at the mirror and just like lift my eyebrows and then drop them, and let them just fall. And it gives you, when you do that, it gives you a perspective on where your eyebrows should fall to, because the amount of characters that I've seen that I've had to, you get your one of your modelers sends a their first technical pass of the character with the topology and stuff, and they've neutralized it, and the amount of times I've seen it where there's a slight smile, the eyebrows are like kind of in a happy position, you know what I mean? They're not flat, they're like up a little bit. And so you want to make sure, because it's going to make it harder for blend shapes, like I said, and for rigging. So for this guy, like, so an example will be, this guy is probably going to have a bit of a brows down a little bit, the inner brows down. So because as you said, it was, let me double check, the Babu, yeah. That's generally his pose in animation. That's generally his pose, is like a brows down, just kind of look, a bit stoic. And that's often what I see. There's a bit of the pose still left in there, because often when you do the sculpt, like, you're not doing a sculpt. That said, some studios do. They'll do a fully posed sculpt and then move back from there. But generally, you will do your sculpt in an A pose and with a bit of an expression. The reason you're going to do it in a little bit of an expression is just because this has to, one, impress your art director. Your art director has to be happy with it. And having a completely neutral face makes the character look really dead. So a bit of an expression will help just sell the character. And then after your art director is happy with it, then it has to go to whatever client, or has to go above that. And if you're working with a client, and you want them then to get that feeling, and they're not modelers, so they don't really understand what the technical requirements are for a character. So even sometimes what I'll do when working in production, and you can see here I like to work in separate pieces, is once I get to a certain point, before I've done my block out and the shapes are working, I'll save the block out, then Dynamesh it and smooth it out, whatever, and then send that. And then if the art director comes back and says, oh, we need to change this, change that, I can go back to the blockout file and keep working in the blockout file, because that's going to be faster and easier, you know, just less of a headache. Because once, like I said, everything's blended together, everything's welded together, you have to fight things more. Depends on the changes, of course, but generally speaking, you know, things rarely, because it's not, when for any of you guys that don't work in production, it's not always about just looking at the character and going, does it look good or not? Like, it's not, there's more to it than that. It's, you very much are working from, I mean, there is, of course it needs to look good, but it also needs to feel the way the art director and the director want the character to feel. It's not just about, right, well, you did a sculpt and it looks good, so approved. So it's often the case, especially early on in a production, that, you know, you're gonna have to do a couple of passes before it gets approved, and it's nothing to do with whether you're a good sculptor or not. Obviously it helps, but because it does look good, but you often do have to get a few passes so you get the feel that the director is looking for. So I want to move some stuff around now. Ian, we're sculpting Kilcullen, an Irish mythological character. And speaking of blend shapes, would you recommend using blend shapes in ZBrush to show off a portfolio piece, like showing the different expressions along with neutral expression? Yeah, absolutely. That's great to see in a portfolio, because obviously as a character modeler, it's part of your job. Even, you know, sometimes you'll be working in a production that only uses rigging, but generally you're using at least a combination of rigging and blend shapes, and sometimes you'll be working with just blend shapes. The whole facial expressions are working off blend shapes, so you know, you need to know what you're doing. And you know, if you're sitting in an interview with someone and you're looking through their portfolio and you see, or not even in an interview, but even beforehand, seeing a portfolio sort of an applicant and they've got some expressions in there, like even if you just do like, if you look up like squash and stretch expressions, so it's like basically like eyes closed and everything's squashed, and then, you know, brows up and mouth open. That's great to see in a portfolio for sure. I should absolutely have that in my portfolio, but I've never gotten around to it because I don't know, gobshy. I always like, oh yeah, I mean to do all these things, but I'm always just like, yeah, but I want to do this. I want to do like a cyberpunk girl. I'll do the blend shapes after, and then I finish the cyberpunk girl and I'm like, I want to do Kilcullen. I mean, he's not looking very handsome right now. He's looking more warrior-esque. But we'll let it kind of just evolve. But I do like this thing that's going on. So, you know, that's the nice thing about working in this kind of way. It's just like, in terms of like, you're not tied to anything. You can just kind of play around. I enjoy the process of doing this. It's relaxing, which is important too. It's easy to forget that. It's easy to forget to just enjoy sculpting. You know what I mean? Just indulge a bit. Stop always, and I'm absolutely guilty of that. It's something that I need to remember more, keep in mind more. So stop trying to make, like, I know it sounds weird, but stop trying to make great art all the time. And sometimes just enjoy it. And, you know, if great art comes from it, then great. If not, then no big deal. Sometimes just enjoy the process and try to learn something new. You know, always try to incorporate something that you're not necessarily comfortable with. You know, like if you especially starting out. You know, if you feel like your anatomy needs a lot of work, you know, I don't know, do something fun that you want to do that involves having to do some anatomy, and just enjoy playing with it, enjoy learning it. Because it's very, I think there's not much more satisfying than realizing you're way better than you were, you know, a couple of years ago. You know, or even a year ago, or even 6 months ago, or whatever. Say you've been working a lot in your anatomy, and now you've realized, Jesus, look at the difference between this sculpt and that sculpt that I did like 4 months ago. That's always a great feeling. Hi, I'm from Mongolia. Can you tell me about shortcuts? Example, Control Shift X is mirror. Do you mean, can I tell you what shortcuts I use, or how to make a shortcut? Is that what you're asking? Let me know and I can explain that for you. And shaping the head, what is the main thing you try to implement when doing stylized characters? It's hard to say what the main thing is, because there's a lot of stuff that's important. You know, the silhouette. I guess if I had to say, I would say I try to make sure that the shapes are. I try to be dynamic. Because I like that. Like for me right now, and like I said, it's a lot to do with the process. I don't feel like this is very dynamic, which I quite like the side profile. Maybe the front like not so much. It just doesn't have a lot of, for me in the front, it doesn't have a whole lot of character to it. You know, it's not very distinctive. So that's something that, to me, it's not the first thing I'm trying to think about is the character, not like, does this shape feel like a distinct character, and not just, is this a head, is the jaw in the right place, is this, you know, that kind of stuff. But obviously then that comes into play too. So for example, I kind of like pulling the jaw in there and it running through the ear, but this guy is a warrior, and this feels, because of the larger cranium and smaller jaw and the larger ears and the pointy ears, that's pointy ears is starting to feel a bit villainous. Again, because the jaw's pulled in, you're getting a bit of an arrow feel down here. Again, pointy, villainous. Because the jaw is pulled in as well and the cranium is bigger, that's associated with a smart character. So, you know, if you're doing like, you know, the strategist type character, then that's a good idea. Now, I don't want him to be some burly, you know, Hulk. Think of the Hulk, small cranium, big jaw, big neck. Because he's about strength, not about brains. So here, what's tricky about this is he's not just. What's tricky about a character like this is he's not just brainy, he's not just bulky, he's got this kind of middle ground by nature. He's a bit of a jack of all trades, you know, because he's that superhero, kind of like Achilles or whatever. So in terms of making, just realised I got to move those eyes back too much. In terms of making him really interesting visually and dynamic, like by nature he's kind of neutral. You can't make him really distinctive. It's often something you'll find with main characters. Main characters are often not very interesting looking compared to the villain or whatever, which most of you will probably agree with, just because it's generally the case. The main character is often quite generic looking. One, because that's the biggest chunk of the audience can kind of put themselves in the character's shoes, and because generally a main character doesn't have isn't like the really smart one or the really strong one or the one with, like, you know, some really distinctive characteristic. They're usually this middle ground. It's just like an archetype that's kind of embedded, at least in Western stories often. Can't speak for outside of that necessarily, at least not. I don't feel educated enough on that to comment too much on it. But hey Ash, how you going? Hey, it's Daisy. I have a lovely turnout today. Shane, Ian, Ash. Some nice questions. I'm loving it. I'm a very beginner modeler enthusiast, and was wondering what skill level I would have to reach before being able to make some money for doing it. Are there low-level jobs that beginners can do that will help them improve their skills whilst being productive? Well, okay. That's a loaded question. So, are there beginner-level jobs? Absolutely. Well, okay, so it depends on what level of begin. Like, if you know, obviously you need to know your way around. You know, if you're using ZBrush, you need to know your way around ZBrush. Enough that, you know, if someone says make this, you can make it. Maybe you can't make it amazingly, but you can make it, and you know you can get somewhere. If so, for a brand new beginner, but like for, it's a good way to ballpark it. There's so many. The reason it's a loaded question is because there's so many different kinds of studios. So many different levels of studios. So obviously If you want to be a junior in Disney, that's going to be very different to if you want to be a junior in like a 10-man studio, you know, in the village down the road from you. The expectation of skill is going to be very different there. So there is beginner level kind of, I say beginner, I don't mean beginner, I'm a beginner in ZBrush. If you're a beginner in ZBrush, you're going to have to probably give it a while. But like, for example, for me, I did a lot of 2D before I ever used ZBrush, and I was using ZBrush 7 months, and then I got my first job as a 3D modeler, as a 3D character modeler. But if I had never done any drawing and I had just started using ZBrush, then there's no way that would have happened. I would have had to learn so much about like anatomy and shape language, and I would have had to develop my eye a lot more, where I did a lot of that groundwork drawing. And so when I got into ZBrush, once I got to grips with the software, I could, you know, I start getting better and better with the tools in ZBrush, and found them, well, obviously really enjoyed sculpting in ZBrush then, and kind of, so I stuck with it. And at that point as well, it's worth saying, in those 7 months, like I was in ZBrush like 6 odd hours a day. So, you know, I did make a good chunk of progress in that time. So, to me, I think everyone won't agree with me on this, but I see a lot of people in studios, and you know, they do like previs, for example, and they're like, oh, I'm in previs, but I want to be a character modeler. And you're like, all right, cool. And it's very, in my experience, very rare you see them actually do it. Often they just stick with previs because now they've got a job. I'm not saying this is like a rule across the board, of course. But you know, they've got a job, and that job takes up at least, that job takes up 8 or more hours a day, and they generally don't have the energy then to go home and really practice and get better. So you know, obviously some people, you don't have the opportunity to, you know, especially you get a bit older, you don't have the opportunity to not work. But if you have a job and you're sustainable, there's no point in trying to get any old job in a studio just to get paid in order to do the job you want to do in the studio. Just do any job if you need to, whatever job you're in. I would say just, you know, throw yourself into doing the one that you really want to do, because it's the only one that you're ever going to really enjoy, and therefore the only one you're ever going to have any chance of getting really good at. Like really good. Because to be really good at anything, you need to love it, because you can't force yourself to practice something enough. I mean, I guess technically you can, but it's a high expectation to have yourself to practice something you don't really enjoy or you don't love all the time in order to become really good at it, because you need to practice all the time. You need to, you know, some people more than others. It's just the truth of it. Some people take the things quicker than others, but if you want to be really good, there's no shortcut there. You need to practice a lot. So I wouldn't recommend to somebody, oh, just get in and do previs until you can get into characters or something. It's just, you know, if you need to work and just practice as much as you can till you get good enough at characters or whatever it is you want to do, until the studio has to pay attention to you. Or at least, some people may disagree with me there, I'm not sure, but that's how I looked at it. my first job in the studio was as a character modeler, and I wouldn't have changed that, because before I worked in IT, before I ever worked in animation, and I spent as much time as I possibly could doing character sculpts, like I said, in those 7 months, and before that I spent as much time drawing characters, and that was the most important, that to me was the most important thing to get me to that level that was useful to a studio. So, and you know, I applied to a studio, and by the way, I have no college qualifications. I left college, I finished my second year. I won't get into that, but anyway, I finished college and left, I should say, and just started painting and drawing all the time. And then, like I said, started ZBrush, and you know, got good enough that someone noticed and said, "Oh, you should apply here." So I did. I got a job. And at that point, I had replaced my entire 2D portfolio with an entirely 3D portfolio, like 7 or 8 pieces, and all just sculpts. Which, you know, not suggesting that you should do that. I would recommend that you have some topology in your portfolio, but you know, nothing's black and white. I didn't have any topology. I didn't know much about character topology, other than the little bit that I learned in college. I didn't know anything about blend shapes, and blend shapes and topology were both part of the job, but I learned that as a junior. But it was important. That was really, so the sculpting part I'd gotten, you know, pretty good at, or decent at, enough that, you know, if you give me a character, if you give me 2D, I can make it, and do an okay job at that point. And then, so I threw myself into, you know, every opportunity I could to learn more from the other artists in the studio and such about topology and blend shapes, you know, without like harassing them. But yeah, that was a long way to answer that question. His profile looks a bit like Conor McGregor. Yeah, I've heard that before. All right. Are you using a graphics tablet? Yeah, I'm using Wacom Cintiq. What did I? There's a couple of long ones there. You're a pool of knowledge. Thank you very much, Babu. I mean, I guess that's a matter of perspective, but yeah, I'll take it. Thank you. The exact situation for the best 2 weeks for to understand. When shaping the head, what is the main thing you try and implement when doing stylized carry? Oh yeah, I got that one. Alright, so I need to go down. So about these emotions, the blending, do you happen to have some source when I could get more information about the process? Actually, Brees is in. Hey, Brees. Brees is like, I worked with Brees for a while, and he's a real good friend, and he's a hot shot character modeler as well. If you don't know his work, which you probably do, but if you don't, go check out his work, because he's the man. I learned a lot from that guy. I learned a serious amount from that guy. He's one of my favourites. What a gent. Thanks for joining, Brees, if you're still there. Delighted. So hey, I'm a very beginner modeler. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, okay. Oh yeah, that's the one I read. It's a very decent stuff. If you don't mind reading a bunch. Yeah, the Unreal documentation. All right. Like, how to apply a blend shape is one thing, but how to make good blend shapes, I don't see a whole lot of stuff on. Like, everything I learned in the studio while working, and I learned a lot from a guy called Jorge Alonso. Unfortunately, I can't tell you where to find his portfolio because he's one of those. I mean, if you work in any studio, you'll generally often find artists that you're like you've never heard of or seen anywhere, but they are like masters. And Jorge Alonso is one of those artists. He's as me and Gavin O'Donnell called him. He's a ghost. He's one of those just incredible artists, and he has a really amazing understanding of topology and blend shapes, and I was really lucky to get to work with him and learned a ton from him. Actually, honestly, the two people that I learned the most from was Jorge Alonso and Brice Lavelle St. Martin. You can see him in the chat there. I can get his, so let's do that. There you go, get a load of that fella. Boom. Oh, there we go. Nice. Yeah. So I learned a lot from those two guys. A lot about like the technical side of things from Jorge, and then a lot about like the more design sculpt stuff from Brice, and a lot about just how would I put it, like how to approach and think about things from Brice. Brice is like also a great has a great business mind. He's a clever cookie. Professionally speaking, okay, Brian McAley. Professionally speaking, Paul, how do you handle a group of characters? You notice you're improving each character to the point that the last character you work on is way better than the first. If you mean how do I handle that in like, so if I've done, okay, so first, firstly, that's great. That's what you want. You want your characters to be improving. Like, there's a character that I think still holds the highest amount of likes, but like I would call them legacy likes at this point. It's been there the longest, so it's just, but it's Mouse, based on Samuel Yun's work, that I did, and it was really popular at the time. Pixologic used it to advertise ZBrush in some magazines and stuff, so it did really well, and that was awesome. But when I look back at it, I can see so many problems with it, and that's a good thing. That means like I don't want to be looking back at that and thinking, you know, I'm exactly the same. That's a big problem. That would mean in years I haven't made any improvements. So, I mean, firstly, that's a good thing. That's what you want. So when I see that, I'm happy. And two, if you mean in like your portfolio, once I see work in my portfolio that I feel is fundamentally flawed, you know, is clearly a lower level than I'm at right now, I'll scrap it. I'll just remove it entirely. I don't like. This is a divisive subject because some people keep almost everything in there. To me, I feel like that's not the best way to go about it. You know, like if I'm looking at work for people applying for a job, it's very confusing. You see, like this. There's a lot of inconsistencies here, and you could think, on one hand, you could think, all right, well, it's obviously just this is old work, and you can look at that, and if you've got time to go in and check the date that stuff was posted, which you generally don't, you shouldn't expect that from people, from potential employers. Sometimes I'll think about, well, are these ones good because they had help with it, and when they're on their own, this is as good as they can do? Or, you know, was this art directed by somebody and that's why this one's good? Did someone have to kind of hold their hand to get them to this level of quality on this particular one? Or why is there such a jump in quality? So I don't think it ever serves you. It never like if I'm looking at your portfolio and you want to apply to the studio we work for, if I'm looking at your portfolio, there's no use in me looking at bad work. Like, it's not going to serve you in any way. So always put your best foot forward. That's my opinion on it. So if you've improved and your quality has jumped a lot, especially when you're starting out, like you can really make big leaps at times. So yeah, I would say, my opinion on it is get rid of the work that is no longer representative of your level, because that's just your portfolio is, right? It's that's what it's showing. It's showing your level of ability from a professional point of view. Must be a good PC since half of stream isn't waiting for render to finish. Oh, okay. You have a pretty decent PC. What was, oh, that's cruel. What was that? Oh, it looks like some parts are higher res than others. Can you talk about that? How you approach subdivision? Yeah, well, yeah. Like, I'm not working on this right now. There's no use to. I could use dynamic subdivision. Just, so it doesn't look. But in terms of subdivision, I'll only subdivide as much as I kind of feel I need to. Like, if I want to get a hard edge, then I need more levels of subdivision. So I'll do that. You know what, I actually think at this point, what are we at there? That hasn't gone. Okay, so let's subdivide that. Throw that up here. And merge. And Dynamesh. Tap that with a smooth. Now hide everything, unhide this. Duplicate it. ZBrush it. That'll allow you. Subdivide a couple of times till you're not seeing the topology. You can go one more. And then project. Run a smooth over. Don't need this one anymore. And now I can keep working. I know I've got subdivisions. So, for example, highest subdivision there, yeah? Subdivision 5. So I'm going to smooth this. Smooth is at 24. It's taking a while. so many polys as well that I'm not, you know, wherever I stop smoothing, this is like essentially polishing. And wherever the brush ends, it's not having any effect. So there's also a less controllable fall off. Why is the focal shift? Okay. And where, alright, so we'll go back. Where if I go down the subdivisions, say to subdivision 2, a couple of taps. I'm getting the same thing. So the big one, alright, so let's say for example as well, say I'm highest subdivision, right, and got like this going on in the back here. So in the silhouette, it's affecting the silhouette, the head. So alright, I need to fix this. So I hold shift, put the pen down, lift shift to get the alternate version of it where it averages the faces rather than just polishes them. And start going. Try to fix this up. For me, I'm already frustrated with how long this is taking. This is ridiculous. Have I fixed it? So obviously not, right? So now if I drop the subdivisions to say here, again, you can keep the subdivision or the Z intensity pretty low here, just for control. So same thing again, shift, press, lift shift. Now it's fixed. And now as you go up to subdivisions, there'll be levels of detail in the subdivisions, so you might have to just give it a tap. See the difference? That's why you want subdivisions. That's a big reason why you want subdivisions. Also, if I want to make any big moves here, if I make them on the high poly, especially with the more, so see the way I'm pulling out and creating a shadow here by moving this, and then I'm leaving another one here because I'm creating a crease there where the brush stops. Gets all lumpy, right? Because there's so many polys, so many points to move around. So I drop the poly count, and now I can pull in, and there's a better like fall off, or I can control the fall off better because there's less points moving. You know, if you want to put, it's much easier to make a smooth line out of 4 points than it is out of 54 points. You with me? Like if I gave you a bunch of 1 cent coins, if I gave you 4 and said make an arc that I can draw a line across, and it will be a clean arc. Where if I give you 50 pennies and say, all right, now make an arc, like the pennies are going to be offset a little bit here and there, some a lot, some a bit, and there's no way that line's going to be straight. So that's the principle. So that's why you want subdivisions. Does that make sense? Let me know if I explained that okay. I should just do a talking podcast and record sculpting or something, because I always end up yapping too much. But I enjoy it though. Not gonna lie. You gave me 50 pennies, I just run with them. Actually, someone asked earlier, just reminding me there, because I was talking to Ash a little bit about the whole NFT thing. I don't know how I feel about the NFT thing yet. I think I don't want to say anything about the NFT thing yet, because I don't know enough. I'm by no means an authority on that, and I don't know how I feel about it yet. It's a mixed bag of emotion. There's a lot to digest on that particular subject. Poor, can you give me 50 pennies? We can do like a class where I'll show everyone why subdivisions are required, and I'll give everyone 50 pennies each, but it's €10 to join, so your call. Yeah, see, NFT, hype and money laundry. Someone else will say, oh, I made loads of money and I changed my life with it. I'm not gonna get into that because it's very divisive and I don't know enough. So I just brought it up to tell you I'm not talking about it, basically. Sorry. Yeah, cool. I would listen to your podcast. I actually would like to do a podcast. I was thinking about doing even just some YouTube videos and kind of talking about, kind of stuff that I talk about here that might be a bit more applicable. About like, I don't know, share my opinion on, things in the industry, philosophies, that kind of thing. Bringing the NFT convo to the stream. No, it's more of a disclosure than a conversation. It's like, just so you know, don't ask. Fearless. About NFTs. Still a bit unsure about when to use dynamic subdivision versus regular subdivision. So dynamic subdivision, alright, so one thing to be aware of, when I'm just sculpting, I use a bit of dynamic subdivision. If I just, like down here, I'm not sculpting into this yet, don't need to do anything with it. So I can just hit D and just have it there and it's fine. And it just doesn't look like that is the only reason for now, right? Where when I want to sculpt into it, I need more resolution. I need, like, if I want to use a Damien standard and go in and start, like, adding any detail, whatever. I need subdivisions to do that. I need more polys. Simple as. So that's why I'm heading up the subdivision levels. Like on the throat here is a better example. So there's no subdivisions on that. But you can see what I do first here. You see the way, like, this topology is going this way, not wrapping around or anything. It's just, so whatever. Let's just dynamesh it. Something a bit more. The edge flow is going with the flow of the shape a little bit better, so I can go with that. Now I'm going to subdivide it so that I can get in here and just give some indication of the mastoid. So when I need to sculpt in, I need subdivision levels. Dynamic subdivision isn't going to do me any good there. Now what I use dynamic subdivision for most, other than, for example, if something like the eyelashes, say I just want these boxy stylized eyelashes, there's no need to subdivide it because I'm only going to have to decimate it in order to get it into another program to render. So, because that's the other thing, ZBrush can handle more polys. So I'm conscious of, well, what do I need? So I'll only subdivide when I need more topology, when I need more faces to sculpt detail. So outside of stuff like that, or maybe, you know, I just want the, like those eyebrows, I just want these kind of, this kind of clean shape. I don't want to add detail, so I can just leave that as a dynamic subdivision. If I need to do, if I'm starting with a base mesh with topology that I want to keep, and I don't need to make normal maps or anything like that, I will use dynamic subdivision and never subdivide. Why? Because when you subdivide, it shrinks the mesh. I remember the first time I ever tried to do blend shapes, and I didn't know that, and so I had my base mesh in Maya, just a head. I just wanted to do like a smile and blah blah blah. So I brought it into ZBrush to move stuff around, and I subdivided like 3 times, did it, blah blah blah, did another one, subdivided like 3 times, did another one, and then I brought all those back into Maya, and used the blend shapes, and every time I dialed in a blend shape, the head got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. It's called a double transform, because if your blend shape, whatever shape your blend shape is, whatever you change will be translated into your base mesh. So if you have a head that's smaller, and even if the other head is the same amount of smaller, it will double it. It will make it that amount smaller again and again and again and again and again. So yeah, if you're using a base mesh for production, then that's another reason where you don't want to use subdivisions. So there's a few things like that. Let's have a bit of crack. What time is it? I'm tied between getting like longer streams. You know, Ash, you do 4 hours, right? I think that's a good number. You can get something out in that time. 2 hours is hard to get something. I'm listening to like synth right now, and he's got like a synth vibe with that hairdo, a 90s. I don't want to do this. Alright, so here's another thing I can do. Slice. Close holes on that. Close holes on that. ZBrush. Not like this, Paul. You are using yourself as a reference. Yeah, that's what it is. Double of me. I've seen people do that, and it's cool. I've never done like a self-portrait thing. And some people would argue it's kind of egotistical. I don't think it's egotistical. It could be fun doing like a cartoon version yourself. Lowish does them all the time, and they're awesome. So I'm just remeshing again to get the topology shifted over. See, you could do that with Dynamesh, but you can also do, I mean, for that particular function, Dynamesh is better, but I think I was making a mistake. Let's go back in here. So I could just shove this around and distort the eyes and whatever, but there's like a part of me in production, it's a lot less messy to keep the eyes as spheres, and it's just become ingrained in me now. It bothers me if the eyes are not spheres. So I'm just, see, like, so this is so you got like this and then bang, and it's a straight across here. So I'm just gonna I don't want to make it obviously round, but I just want to just add a subtle amount of a bend to it. And it feels less threatening, you know? Hard edges feel threatening. I just did like a wrap thing there, and I didn't mean to do hard edges. I should have done, is like threatening. I want to do more of you know, I want to keep things just a little bit rounded, almost inflate it slightly, if you know what I mean. No, I don't mean inflate like the tool, but inflated like, you know, oh, you're not gonna. If you any of you know what Fisher Price is, like toys that they just have, like, you know, they don't have hard edges to them. Now I can add hard edges for sure. It's not like I can't add hard edges because he's not an evil character. I can of course add hard edges, but I don't want to be throwing hard edges everywhere. Like on a lot of the curves, on a lot of the lines, I want to give a bit of a, because it can also add structure, right? But I want to give a bit of a curve to the bigger lines, just to make sure that he doesn't feel threatening. Because Kilcullen is a nice guy. Well, until he turns into the big beast thing, and then he's the Hulk essentially. He knows not friend nor foe. Oh, hey Yulia, thanks for joining. Nice to see you back. I was actually sure your stream was going to be next week, but better late than never. Yeah, there was because I didn't stream. I didn't stream one of the weeks, so it shifted. So yeah, it probably, well, yeah, no, it would have been. But yeah, it's shifted now, so it'll be 2 weeks from now. Will be the next one, and continue that way. So this is obviously all gonna go into here. Something I like to do, and this isn't a rule or anything, but I like to do with hair is just actually kind of, and I'm not doing that intentionally, but here it just reminded me, is thinking layers, if you know what I mean. Like, think almost like, do you ever see if you go to a barber's or hairdressers, they like grab a line of hair to cut it. Like, think of the lines of hair overlapping each other. But hair is always been a tricky part of any sculpt for me. Always, I need plenty of reference, and that's okay as well. That's something, you know. Often I hear artists kind of being very self-deprecating when they, oh, I can't do this, I'm terrible at doing anatomy or hair or clothing or detailing or whatever. That doesn't matter, just spend longer on it. That's okay to not be like, you know, the best at doing a specific thing. It doesn't make it bad. Everyone has those like strengths and weaknesses. I'd say I find hair can be quite difficult. I think. Well, yeah, I'll talk a little bit about that. I think, like, yeah, Tiger King hair, yeah. Like for me, like for example, like a stark contrast in terms of what you will see on my stream versus Ash's, because Ash's. I'm like everything has to be like controlled, and I work in separate pieces, and I'm that's the way my brain works. Where Ash is much more free flowing, I guess. I hope that's fair to say, Ash. That's my impression of your workflow. It's much more. Yeah, Ash is a freak. Um, she's much more free flowing, and loose, and which is obviously really good for like concepting. Because like by nature, like quicker and everything, it's just your brain. You've got your happy accidents, and you got your, you're quickly figuring out if things work, if they don't. And just the loose nature of that kind of workflow is has a lot of strengths to it, and like over time from working in this way, I find it hard to actually work that way. Like I struggle to work that way, and it's not for a lack of trying, but it's like I've focused so much. I talked about this a little bit in terms of boxing before. There's boxing in boxing. That's like a phrase in fighting, I guess. I heard it. I probably just in general, but I heard it in terms of boxing, where your greatest strength can also become your greatest weakness, because you get. So the idea there is, say you've got this big heavy left jab, and you knock people out all the time with it, like Tyson or whatever. When you get to a high level, then your opponent is going to try and use your left jab against you, because he knows that you're going to do that. And in terms of artwork, in terms of what I'm saying there about, like, I spent so much time trying to make sure that I had control over the shapes, and that has its strengths for sure. Like, I need to control, like, the lines and the flow of the shapes, and this way absolutely helps with that. But I lose some of there's an appeal to, like, the looseness of that kind of workflow, that I can't get working this way, if that makes sense. And I don't have enough practice in it because of the fact that I've spent time working in this kind of workflow. So it's not to say that I regret working in this way or anything. Of course, like this kind of style and way of doing it is just basically, like anyone, like any artist, it's like your thought process and personality translated into a workflow, essentially. So it definitely works for me. Well, I guess it must, or else I wouldn't be here talking to you guys. So, but it is something I'm aware of, and it's important to be aware of those things. Of, like, so maybe, at least if I'm aware of the fact that, say Ash's kind of workflow that's more loose, and that has such an appeal to it, that I can be like, right, I need to, now I've done this long enough, I can still do this, but I need to start to think of maybe ways that, because I like that looseness, of incorporating that into my own work. And that's, you grow from doing that, and your style grows and all that type of stuff. I don't have any idea how I started on that tangent, but anyway, there you go. Looks like Ninja in Die Antwoord. I've never seen that. I don't know what that is, but I hope he's cool. I hate him from the front, kind of. But I like him from the side. What do I do with that? This is where I need to just, with some like hair, the way Ash works, I feel if I could not summon, if I could bring out my inner Ash, then I could work in this. I could work with hair and things like that quicker and in a kind of nicer way, I think. But like right now, obviously I'm streaming, I'm talking to you guys. Like if I was doing this, I'd be, at this point I'd already be going and checking reference for hair and making sure that I could find something to kind of inform a nice flow to the shape of the hair and all that kind of crack. Maybe this could be, do you know what, the symmetry is probably really the problem. Or at least part of it. Am I going over time here? Awfully close. Let's go the other way. Hi Paul, does all your streams go to ZBrush Live or just chosen ones? Yeah, all my streams are on, at the moment all my streams are on ZBrush Live. I have got my own Twitch channel, but I regret to say I tend to neglect it, unfortunately. This is one of those many things that I wish I did more, but you know, can't do everything, I guess. I have all my PC parts except GPU, so I can't use Blender anytime soon. Oh, good. The workflow is similar to a traditional clay. This workflow is similar to a traditional clay artist. That's kind of actually where it came from, because when I started and I was just using Dynamesh and stuff, I was still trying to achieve this kind of thing often, not always, like everyone. When I started, you know, I did orcs and I did all that. I've got the render somewhere to prove it, but I wonder, I think I actually still have a bunch of my like first ever stuff. Maybe I could show on a stream, maybe, if anyone's interested in seeing that kind of. It's awful. Like I think I might still have. No, I won't say it because I might not, and then it'll be, people are asking for it and I can't. But what's your character for? Embrace your inner Ash. Yeah, exactly. Pulling a Billy Connolly, the master of random tangents. yeah. Oh man, I love Billy Connolly. Yeah, I'm terrible for going on tangents. But the characters for this is, so I was explaining earlier. This is Kilcullen. He's a character from like Irish mythology. He's kind of like Achilles, similar story, except he goes like Hulk mode and kills everyone at times. And it's for, because St. Patrick's Day is coming, so I said I'd do something Irish. And I didn't want to do a leprechaun because I thought, well, most people are probably going to do a leprechaun because that's like the most obvious kind of thing, character that you associate with St. Paddy's Day. And just because I am Irish, I thought I can't just do the same thing everyone else does. I better do something you know, a bit more traditionally Irish. So Kilcullen was what I ended up with. Yeah, he really does look like an 80s rock star right now, which is cool, but also bothering the hell out of me. And I'm probably definitely out of time too, I would imagine. Yeah, I'll have to. I was considering doing it this time, but maybe not this time. But obviously not this time. I will. It's on my list. It's on my to-do list to get a base mesh and start something from a base mesh, just so not necessarily to show you guys, just to change it up, not necessarily to show you guys sculpting, but so much. But I will be doing that too, obviously. But just to show, to show you guys the topology and kind of how I treat that. Oh shit! Turn off symmetry. There you go. If you are interested in that. Yeah, I can just show you the topology that I generally use, and just more. I could probably talk a little bit to you know, neutralizing the face, where, like, why certain loops are in certain places. You know, there's some important stuff that I see often people miss. Like, you know, little things like when you do topology on the face, like your eyebrows should sit in between certain loops, and there's a specific reason for that. So there's like stuff like that, and that stuff leads into, like, will make the blend shapes easier, faster, better looking. Will make rigging easier, faster, better looking. And will make animating it easier, faster, and better looking. So, you know, less input, more output. So yeah, you should never underestimate the power of good topology. It's the difference in the mentality of working in production. Is, you know, when I do something here, I'm doing it for the sake of a render, and that's where it needs to look good. When I do it for production, it needs to look good when it's moving. So it's very important. I mean, I know I don't need to tell you guys that, but all right, just look at it from the side, because it's better from the side. I don't know. I'm struggling with how to get this silhouette nicer from the front. The hair definitely needs some. We're being cheeky now. We're 5 minutes over. Actually, you know what? I need to. Something I always forget, and something I'd recommend: change your millimeter on your camera to 85, not 50. 50 is why you get that. Like out here, you're like, yeah, cool, and then you get in, and like it's like the nose starts really coming towards the camera. You know, especially you do that. Like, it's generally speaking, when you're doing a character like that, you'll use a higher lens. 85 tends to work better, especially if you're doing renders outside in another software. You can keep that in mind, that you use 85, and you can use 85 there if you want it to be the same. You can course play with it, you know. That's great. Like that introduction of like the camera lenses and stuff in ZBrush, when I seen that, I was a happy man. That the focal length, and you can export that camera too, which is really handy. Even in production, in fact, really handy. Look at that. Starting to get a bit alien. That's another thing I don't like. I don't like it when underneath the hair the head is a mess. That's something I look for when I'm doing approvals on a character. I'll check under the hair. That makes me sound like I'm really strict. I'm not. I won't be that bad. Like, I'm not a horrible lead. Gives everyone a hard time. But I will check for that stuff. You might need a variation of the hair later. You have to make it on a dodgy head. Great choice. Do you have your own channel you stream on? All? Yeah, I do have my own channel. I can send it to you. I do, and I will stream on it again. But at the moment, I'm working on a few things, and I haven't had the chance like to be streaming. But it is like, I do want to get back streaming more often. I haven't streamed in a good while on my own channel, but it's in the works. I definitely want to do it. So, I will absolutely do like a bunch of. I was thinking of doing more like topology and more technical stuff like that on there as well. For anyone working in the industry, that could be kind of handy, you know, especially if any juniors or anything in the industry that wants to know a bit more about simple things that people tend to miss, like how to place the teeth in the mouth properly, how to make the mouth bag properly, that kind of stuff that I wouldn't necessarily get into here. Yeah, maybe I'll just, when I do the render, maybe I'll just have them looking off camera, because I don't like that. So much. But I'm all good with that. Quite like where the nose sits in. Bit strange, but I like it. Anyway, mouth sacs make me sad. Yeah, I actually, that's something that comes up really often, because it's really easy to get wrong, and almost, I know a lot more artists that get it wrong than get it right. And again, I was talking earlier about Jorge Alonso. He showed me, he was like, you see how this works better, and it suddenly just boom, it clicked. I was like, okay. And I think it's more just a lot of people, they don't really think too much about the mouth bag. So, or I love that mouth sack. I like that. Or some people call it the mouth sock, which makes me don't like that. But yeah, if you, yeah, I will do it at some stage. Enough people there seem to be interested in seeing it, so I'd be happy enough to do it. And you know, it should be helpful to a good chunk of people, I think, in actual real life. So and for anyone working in the industry, and for anyone who wants to work in the industry also, it'd be good. It's good to know that stuff going in, because especially if you're a junior and you start day one and you can show your lead, because I know there's lots of leads out there that wouldn't do it right, and you go in, you show your lead how to do a proper mouth sack, aka bag, aka sock, you'll impress them. Yeah, cool. Oh yeah, I have YouTube there, and I keep meaning to. I want to make a tutorial, and I want to make all sorts of things, and I want to do a million and one different things, and I just don't have time to do all of them at once. So I'll get to them. Anything else there? I need to. Do you have? Yeah, I use keyboard shortcuts. Yeah, that's. But it's a mixture. Obviously, you can see the stuff on my UI and stuff as well. You either impress them or trigger their ego. Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, if you trigger their ego, you know that's a bad lead. In my opinion, that is a bad lead. No matter what level you are, you can learn from anybody, and if their ego gets triggered, which yeah, for sure I've seen that, then yeah, you need to not listen to them, but you need to just maybe keep them a little bit at arm's length and try to find someone else you can learn from. It's unfortunate when for any artist, I think I hate to see that. I hate to see people get really egotistical like that. But yeah, so we're getting cheekier by the minute. 11 minutes past, so we better call it a day. I hope I'm not interrupting anyone else's stream. So thanks a lot for joining, guys. It's a pleasure as always, and I'll see you in 2 weeks. It'll be after Paddy's Day then, so